guys enjoyed ending a little bit early last week, so I don't know if I can promise that this week, but we'll try. I do want to continue to do some worship with you guys in here on Wednesday nights, but I think this material, especially tonight's, I think last week's material was a little bit, I thought it was good, but you guys, maybe you thought it was, maybe you didn't, but this week's material, dealing with this title, Jesus Among Other Gods, and the questions about evil, I think, even if it's not interesting to you, you need to hear this, because this is one of the biggest challenges towards our faith that's out there. And I feel like I say that every week, but it really is. This challenge right here, that dealing with questions of evil and how God interacts with the world, are questions that are being asked daily by people in America, especially about challenging Christian faith. And so I'm going to try to give you guys some material tonight that will help you. I don't want you to take this material and learn it and then go like fight all your atheist friends or whoever you're fighting. Hopefully you're not fighting anybody. But, I don't want you to like use it as firepower. What I want you to use it for is, first of all, to strengthen your faith. Second of all, so that you can have a chance to defend yourself if somebody attacks you, but not in a hateful, attacking way, but in a loving, sincere way. Because usually if somebody's so passionate against Christianity, it's more of a heart issue than it is a head issue, especially at your age. Nobody your age, very few people your age, are smart enough to be able to mentally make a decision that they don't believe in God. So if people your age are making decisions that they don't believe in God, it's not that they've done all the extensive studies. It's because something in their heart has led them to that. Whether they've been negatively influenced by Christians, or whether they've grown up in the Christian worldview and they've just rejected it, or whatever it is. But something in their heart is doing it. A lot of them, it might be because they lost a loved one, and they just can't imagine why God would let that happen to them. So we're going to talk about that tonight. What I want to do to start off is I want to read John chapter 9. Just a quick story about Jesus, and then we'll go on. Somebody read that for me, because I got to save my voice as much as I can. It's 5 slides.
As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Rabbi, his disciples asked him, "Why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins?" "It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins." Jesus answered, "This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the task assigned us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work it. No one can even work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world."
Okay, John 9, 1 through 5 is what he just read. Okay, the question posed by the disciples is very interesting. This is a guy who's blind, and they go and they say, "Rabbi, Jesus, why is this man blind? Who sinned? Was it him or his parents?" Now, the guy was born blind, and they ask, who sinned? Was it him or his parents? And so my automatic assumption is that somebody must have sinned to create God's wrath against this guy to make him born blind. That's the only logical conclusion they could come to. And Jesus' response is really interesting, and we're going to read more about Jesus' response at the end of class. But this is a question that, to this day, we get dealt with. Because what was really at their heart, what the disciples were really trying to get at was, they were trying to get at, how does God interact with his people, especially when it comes to sin or bad things happening to people? Does God cause it? Does God inflict that pain on people? Is God the one that made the man born blind? Deserve it? Or does God just do it randomly to people? You see, even back during Jesus' time, people were trying to have these debates and trying to have these discussions. Even before Jesus' time, if you read the book of Job, Job goes through all kinds of turmoil, and his friends, again, are kind of giving him advice, and a lot of the advice is trying to deal with why God would allow Job to go through the suffering that he went through. So even before Jesus, people were asking the question. So the questions we're going to deal with today, if God is so loving, why is there so much evil in the world? And also, how can a loving God let the people he loves suffer so much pain and misery? Those two questions go together, and we're going to deal with those today. And the way I want to deal with them, well, first of all, this is one of the hardest topics for Christians to face, and it's hard for several reasons. First of all, it's a philosophical question, and it demands a philosophical answer. Okay, philosophy is like, how the world works, or how God works would be theology. But dealing with trying to understand why we're here, why the world is the way it is, that's philosophy. And these questions are philosophical questions. Okay, they're asking how God interacts with his people. And they're demanding a philosophical answer. The problem is, the question is also very charged with emotion and personal experience, which are not seeking philosophical answers, but are seeking comfort and relief. Okay? Anytime somebody asks this question, it's usually very personal, because they're dealing with suffering, or they've suffered in their past. And they're trying to figure out why God has allowed them to suffer. You see how there's emotion behind it? It's not just philosophy anymore, it's emotion. Okay? It's kind of like if somebody's shoulder gets knocked out of their socket, they're going to be in lots of pain. If you go up to them and you try to help explain to them why it's possible that the shoulder got knocked out of the socket, well, you got hit going this many miles per hour, and it hit right at this angle, and the way that the shoulder joint works, the ball popped right out because you hit it, and it kind of, if you try to explain that to them, they're probably going to be more ticked off at you than grateful, because they're in pain, they're crying out in misery. They don't want an explanation. What do they want? They want pain relief, right? They want you to put the shoulder back in the socket and then give them a bunch of Tylenol or give them something even stronger so that they don't have to feel the pain that they're going through. You understand? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that. When somebody asks these questions, they're not looking for the answer, the philosophical answer most of the time. They're looking for pain relief because they're going through pain. And they don't want you to just give them all the technical reasons why God acts this way or that way or whatever. So when you deal with these questions, you got to make sure you're dealing with both. You got to make sure you're dealing with both the sympathy, the comfort, the pain relief that they need, and then at the same time balancing that with an actual answer philosophically that gives them an answer. And that takes wisdom. If the event that's causing them so much pain has just happened, you might want to put the philosophy on hold for a while and give them the pain relief that they need. You might want to shut up and just suffer with them and cry with them and show them that you love them. If the event happened 5 years ago in their life and they're still dealing with it and there's still pain, but they're ready to hear it, maybe you start giving them some of the answers I'm going to give you tonight. Okay? So here's the most important thing for you to understand before we get into this. This is not a unique question in Christianity. Every major worldview has to answer the question of evil and suffering. Okay? It's not just Christians that have to give an answer. Every worldview has to tell you, okay, this is how we deal with evil, this is how we deal with suffering. Christians don't get off the hook either. We have to give our answer. But what I'm going to attempt to do is show you the answer that each worldview gives, and then let you judge for yourself, the way we've been doing every week, which one you think is best. My opinion, and maybe I'm going to give you an answer that is skewed, but my opinion, after doing the studies I've done and after presenting what I'm about to give you, Christianity has the best answer for how to deal with evil and suffering. So let's get right into it. Naturalists or atheists. These are people that only believe in the natural world, what they can see. They don't believe in supernatural. Okay? Atheists. They offer one statement and use it to discount God all the time. This is the statement. It says, God cannot exist because there's too much evil evident in life. And they'll say that, and they'll point to the evil and say, there you go, God can't exist. If you say there's a loving God that exists, well, here's evil, boom. If there was a loving God, he would not allow for evil. And then they just kind of dust their hands off and act like they can move on. But here's the thing. The statement assumes that evil exists. But if evil exists, now try to stay with me with this paragraph, okay? If evil exists, then good must exist as well, so that we can tell the difference. Okay? If all you have ever is evil, then you don't know that you have evil. Unless you have good to be able to tell the difference. It's kind of like a fish. Okay? A fish, does a fish know it's wet? Kyle, where is he? Does a fish know that he's wet? A fish that lives his entire life in water. We live outside of water, so we can say, yeah, the fish is wet. But does a fish ever know that it's wet? No. Because it doesn't know what dry feels like. If a fish ever dried out, it died. So a fish doesn't know what dry feels like, and so it doesn't know that it's wet. if you don't have good and evil, you can't tell the difference between the two. Okay? So if you assume that evil exists, when they make this statement, they're assuming that evil exists, they have to also concede that good exists as well. Okay? And if good exists, there has to be some sort of way to measure what is good and what is evil. We call it a moral law. There has to be some sort of governing law that says this is good and this is evil. Okay? You understand that? And there is. Okay? There is a governing law. We'll get into the God stuff here in a minute, but just think about it, okay? If I take a baby and I hold it right here, put it on a table, and I take a big giant knife and I just start chopping the baby up, is that good or is that evil?
That's awesome.
Would anybody in their right mind think that's good?
No.
Unless you're making a joke.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah, we can make some dead baby jokes and guys laugh at it and girls cringe, but it's evil. You start chopping any human being up, that's evil. Okay? We know that there's a moral law because everybody would agree that's evil. Okay? Make sense? So there is a governing moral law out there. Now there's debates when you get into the details. Some people debate what's good and what's bad. But we all know that at least there is evil and there is good in the world. So if there's a governing law, then there has to be an ultimate source for the moral law. At least an objective basis for it. Something that is always true regardless of if I believe it or not. There has to be that. There has to be a source that gives the law. We would call that source God. Okay? So right off from the very basic of their question, when they assume evil, they're assuming there's a moral law. But you guys know that naturalists, atheists don't claim God, and so they have to give an answer for where that moral law comes from. Right off the bat. Now a lot of atheists will not think about this when they give this statement, and then they have to start backtracking when you challenge them on it. Because when you assume a moral law, you have to allow for God. And so here's what they do. A lot of skeptics, we've already said that they don't believe ultimate truth. They say what's true for me may not be true for you. And we talked earlier about how that statement is self-defeating. The statement that there's no such thing as absolute truth, well, that statement is absolute. And so it defeats itself. Because if there's no such thing as absolute truth, then that statement cannot be absolutely true. It's a self-defeating prophecy or philosophy. Okay, that's what a lot of skeptics will buy into, that philosophy. There's no such thing as absolute truth. Some other skeptics will say that evolution can be used to explain our sense of morals. So they'll say, we don't need God, evolution can explain it. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Let's see how evolution explains moral law. Okay? Naturalists say that the universe is random. Evolution is a process where the only rule is survival of the fittest. So things adapt and evolve in order to survive. That's evolution. Okay? Survival of the fittest. If I have a weakness and you have a strength, well, if your strength is better than my weakness and can overcome me, then evolution, you're going to overcome me, you're going to survive, I'm not. Eventually, my race, my gender, my whatever, my group of people who have that weakness will die out eventually because we have that weakness. And your group who has a strength will naturally take over. That's evolution. That's kind of how they talk about it. So anything that is weak will die off or be run over by something that is stronger. Here's a quote from Richard Dawkins. That guy, he just looks like he should play like a villain, doesn't he?
Yes.
It's perfect that he's an atheist because he just looks like a villain to me. Anyways, Richard Dawkins is one of the most famous guys in our world today that's an atheist. That he's like an evangelical atheist. He evangelizes, tries to get Christians to not be Christians anymore. Most atheists are just like, I'm atheist, I don't believe in God. He's like, not only do I not believe in God, but you're not allowed to believe in God either. That's kind of how he is. So here's his quote. In a universe of blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt. Other people are going to get lucky. And you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at the bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, and no other good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is. And we dance to its music. So naturalists like Richard Dawkins on one hand, deny God because of the evil that they observe, and then on the other hand, deny that evil even exists. You see that? Do you see the contradiction there? He says, there is no purpose, no evil. Right there in his quote. He says, on one hand, he throws out the statement, if there is a loving God, there can't be a loving God because there's evil in the world. And we can observe the evil. Look at the people chopping up babies. Okay, that's evil. We can observe it. But then on the other hand, when he gets all philosophical, he says, there is no evil in the world. Because evolution just is. We dance to the music of our own DNA. Can you imagine telling a raped woman that the rapist simply danced to his own DNA? Can you imagine telling a Jew whose families have been victims of the Holocaust, Hitler just danced to his own DNA? This is the answer that naturalists are given. Because they have to allow, they have to either somehow twist things around and say, you know, if they allow moral code or moral law, then that opens up a window for God. And so they've chosen not to go that direction. So instead they've said there is no moral law. And therefore there is no such thing as evil or good. Things just happen. So if you're born blind, sorry blind man, you just got unlucky. If you're born, you know, with AIDS, tough luck. You're dancing to your own DNA. There's no sympathy, there's no comfort there, there's no anything to help people. They don't even recognize evil. And so in his mind, he's basically said that rape is not wrong. If there's no moral law, no moral code, if it's just dancing to our own DNA, then the rapist isn't wrong for raping his rape victim. He can just do it because there's no such thing as good or bad. There's no such thing as evil. So he's not evil for doing it. He can just do it. Hitler's not bad because there's no such thing as bad. If Hitler wants to rule a country and then take all of one race and start putting them into concentration camps and killing them off, that's fine. You know what? Survival of the fittest. Hitler happened to be the fittest. The Jews, sorry, your race is gone. You're not fit enough to survive in this country. That's not good or bad according to Richard Dawkins. That's what he's saying. You see that? What kind of answer is that? You see, when naturalists get down to it, when you break it down, their dealing with evil is not any better. In fact, it's worse than the way Christians deal with it. Because there's no sympathy, there's no compassion, there's no anything. They'll sit there and attack Christians on the basis of evil in the world, but then they'll turn around and say, there's no such thing as evil. And so it doesn't matter what you do. You can just do whatever you want. Do whatever pleases you. The skeptic denies objective moral values because to accept it would be to allow for the possibility of God's existence. But then he uses the moral value of evil to question the existence of a good God. G.K. Chesterton, who he just kind of looks like a doofus or something, but he's actually a great mind. He's like one of the greatest minds in Christianity in like the 20th century. Here's a quote he says in dealing with this problem that atheists run up against, or naturalists run up against. He says, the man of this school, talking about naturalists, goes first to a political meeting where he complains that savages are treated as if they were beasts. Then he takes his hat and umbrella and goes to a scientific meeting where he proves that they practically are beasts. In short, the modern revolutionist, being an infinite skeptic, is forever engaged in undermining his own minds. In his book on politics, he attacks men for trampling on morality. In his book on ethics, he attacks morality for trampling on men. Therefore, the modern man in revolt becomes practically useless for all purposes of revolt. By rebelling against everything he has lost his right to rebel against anything. He says they're basically a walking contradiction. They basically just do whatever, whatever on the political front, they're all about social justice and taking care of the needs, and they attack rich people and try to feed poor people. And that sounds good. In fact, that's what Christians should be doing. But they make it a moral thing. You see, right now, in Washington, people are marching with the big giant red and pink equal signs, trying to say they want equal rights for marriage, talking about they want to allow gay marriage. Now, I'm not going to get into the topic of gay marriage tonight, but they're doing that on a moral basis. They're saying it's morally unethical, wrong, to say that you can allow some people to get married and then not others. We need equality. It's a moral thing. But most of those people marching are atheists, and so they would turn right back around and agree with Richard Dawkins and say there's no such thing as moral law. There's no such thing as good or evil. So on one hand, they're saying it's evil to discriminate. On the other hand, they're saying there's no such thing as evil. It doesn't make sense. Their worlds, they keep them separate. Their philosophical worlds, their political worlds, their, whatever agenda fits them is kind of how they work. And they don't ever come together. They don't ever mesh. Okay? And so here's what I want us to do. We read the quote on G.K. Chesterton. I want us to look at a couple of religions now. We're going to look at pantheism. Pantheism basically just means multiple gods. Buddhism is kind of getting, say what?
Everything is God.
Everything is God. There you go. I'm throwing Buddhism in here too. I don't know if it would necessarily go under pantheism or not, but I'm throwing it in here under this slide anyways. We'll start with Hinduism. Hinduism says that evil and suffering aren't real. Okay, that's what Hindus will tell you when they deal with evil. They'll say, it's kind of like atheists, they'll say evil and suffering are not real. Evil, the entire world we live in is an illusion. And what lies beneath the world, that's what's real. Is to try to take everything that we're experiencing, all of these experiences, we have to try to basically get outside of these experiences so that we can experience what's real. So when evil happens in your world, that's not really evil, because there's no such thing as evil. What you're experiencing is not really happening. They're kind of ducking their head in the sand when bad things happen. So like when I go through real suffering, when you guys go through real suffering in your life, you get beat up at school, or you get made fun of, or you lose a loved one, well, you need to just realize that that's not really happening, because this is not reality. Where reality is somewhere else. And so we got to get into there. We need to get in there through karma, through reincarnation, through meditation, through eventually getting to the state of enlightenment or whatever we can get to so that we can become like gods or become God. So we can tap in, last week we talked about, we can tap into that God that's not born yet inside of us. You got a question, McGuire?
So it's not like having an imaginary world.
Yeah. It's kind of like the Matrix. This is not real. This is the Matrix, and you got to get outside the Matrix to get to the real world. That's kind of similar to what Hindus believe. This is probably a terrible interpretation, but basically the way I put it is, it's almost to say that we're all in one big giant dream in God's head. Like God is just dreaming all this. This is not reality. It's just a dream. And so our goal is to try to wake up from the dream so that we can realize that we're God. I don't know if a Hindu scholar would agree with me on that one. They probably wouldn't, but that's kind of my interpretation of Hinduism. And so the way they deal with evil is they just don't deal with it. They stick their head in the sand and say it's not real. Well, the problem is, any of you that have experienced suffering or pain in your life, you know how real it is. If I come up and pinch you, that's real, right? There's a story of a Hindu scholar who was meeting with a king and trying to explain to the king how no evil was real, that anything that happened in this world was not real, and he was trying to help the king understand this. So the next day the king took a herd of elephants and just released it into the town, and the elephants just kind of went on a rampage and started tearing things up, and people were running for their lives, and until the king kind of rounded them up, and he went to the final elephant, and the elephant was standing under a tree, and this scholar was up in a tree. The king watched him climb up in a tree to avoid the elephant. And so the king walked up to the scholar and said, I thought that this world wasn't real, so why did you run up in the tree to get away from the elephant? And so the scholar, trying to not be outdone by the king, said, well, this is not really me. This is an unreal me and an unreal tree. And I would tell you that's an unreal answer. That's an unreal reality. The reality is there is evil. Hindus try to run from it. So what do Buddhists do? Buddhists claim the exact opposite. They say that this world is real, and the goal is to get to a state where you can escape the realities of this world. Buddhists say that suffering comes because of desire. So if you can get rid of all desire, you will also get rid of all suffering. Do you hear that? If you can get rid of all your desires, you can get rid of all suffering. So if I don't desire, if I don't love my family, then I don't care if they get killed by an axe murderer. If I don't desire them in any way, then it doesn't matter. So there goes, I don't suffer. If I don't desire to survive in this world, then it doesn't matter if I get my head chopped off or if I get pinched or whatever. If I have no desire, then I have no suffering, is what Buddha would say. The goal is to reach enlightenment, to reach nirvana. He would say, by the way, the Hindu would tell the blind man who sinned, you or your parents. The Hindu would say, well, neither, because you're not really blind. Because this isn't real. You're just experiencing an illusion where you're blind. The Buddhist would say, who sinned, you or your parents? Both. You and your parents sinned. And you're both experiencing karma because of it. You're getting karma because in your previous life you sinned, and so you're born a blind man, and your parents are getting karma, in their previous life they sinned, so they get a son who's a blind man, which makes it hard on them. And so he would say, both of you sinned. Any questions?
Wait, so they think like they had a life before that, but they just don't remember it?
Yeah, it's reincarnation. And it's kind of a never-ending cycle until you get to the state of nirvana, which, again, nirvana, to me, my interpretation of it is like a bird that sticks its head in the sand and just pretends like nothing's real.
Like an ostrich.
So Buddha would say, if you get rid of all desire, and you have no desires whatsoever, then you will end all evil and end all suffering. Well, you don't really end all evil, you just don't pay attention to it. That doesn't take any evil away from the world. All it does is just keep you from caring about it. What kind of religion is that? But that's what they say. That's the goal for Buddhism, is to just not care. Mugar?
It's like when you don't want to hear something that someone's going to say and you say, la la la.
That's right. Yeah, it's a la 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 approach. That's exactly right. All right, so you got atheists who say there's no such thing as good or evil. And so therefore, when you break it down and you actually get them to, like the guy that I've been telling you about, Ravi Zacharias, he actually met in, I think it was Oxford, with a group of students who are all atheists. And they were challenging him on this point. And so he got to the point and he said, what would you do if this is where I got my illustration. If I took a baby right up here, put it on the desk, and started chopping the baby up, how would you react to that?
I would freak out.
And there was silence in the room, and then this guy spoke up and he said, well, I wouldn't like it, but I guess it would, but I wouldn't say that you're wrong for doing it. That's what atheists have come to. He wouldn't like it, but he wouldn't be able to condemn you or judge you or say you're wrong for chopping a baby up. Now, Hindus, same thing. Hindus would basically give a similar answer. They might say something about you might be reincarnated as like a chicken or something, but Buddhists would say the goal for me is to get to the point where I don't care about that. So here, let's talk about the Christian worldview, because the Christian worldview gives a entirely different view on evil. The Christian worldview both accepts evil for what it is, recognizes that it's real, and then they give you a solution to deal with it. The other ones try to escape it. Christians don't try to escape it. If you read the Bible, it does not escape evil. The Bible is filled with evil. The Bible is filled with Christians or Jews who do evil over and over again. Okay? Most of the people in the Bible are evil people. So the Bible does not try to escape it. So let's talk about the Christian worldview. First of all, the one thing, we're going to do 6 points here. These 6 points of our faith are things that you've probably heard of before, but in the context of dealing with evil, I want to help you see how our worldview leads us to a better understanding of evil than any other worldview. Okay? First one is that God is holy. Right from the start, we differ from skeptics. We say that there is a moral law and that there is a giver of that law, and He is the standard of goodness. He's the measuring stick. Everything is measured up against God. That's how you can tell what's good and what's evil. Because everything's measured against God. He's like the ruler. You know, you want to know how long something is, you get a ruler and you measure how many inches or centimeters it is. Or you might yardstick or whatever, but you measure with a measuring stick. God is the measuring stick when it comes to good and evil. God is perfection. He's perfect goodness. He's holy. That's what holy means. He's set apart. He's good. If you want to know how good something is, you measure it up against God and see how it stands. And if it's nothing like God, then that would be considered evil. If it's somewhat like God, but obviously nothing measures up to God, but if it's something like God, then you might be able to say it's good. If it falls in line with God, you would say that's good. Okay? From point blank, from the start of our faith, the number one claim we make sets us apart from other religions. We say there is such thing as morals, there is such thing as an ultimate moral code or moral law, and there is such thing as an ultimate rule giver or more person who created morals. And that is the measuring stick to measure morals, and that is God. Okay? The next thing is that we are part of God's story. Again, this is stuff that you've heard before. It's not new because it's our Christian worldview. But I want to help you understand how it applies to being evil, or to evil in the world. We are part of God's story. God is the author of life, and we are living out His script. Our lives are just small subplots to the greater story that's being told. So when the disciples asked Jesus who sinned, they're trying to understand the blind man's part in the greater story of God and the story of life. They're trying to understand how God interacted with that blind man and his family so that they could understand the greater story of God. When they asked Jesus who sinned, okay? They were seeking to understand God. Only when we understand the grand story of God can we seek to understand good and evil in the right context. It's like if you hear quotes from a movie, you can take any quote from a movie and take it out of context and be like, what the heck is that all about? But then when you watch the movie and you see the quote in context, it makes so much more sense. Or a Bible verse. I can take any Bible verse out of context and show it to you, and you might think, I never knew that was in the Bible. Why is that in there? But then when I read the whole story to you and put the verse in there, you might not even notice that because it fits in the context. Okay, when you understand the context, the grand story that God is telling, then you can understand good and evil and how good and evil interact in that context. Does that make sense? Okay? Point number 3. At the heart of God's story is sacred love. You see, we think that we know what love is, but we don't. We think that love is the opposite of evil, but millions of lives are crushed on a daily basis in the name of love. God's love is sacred. God's love is different. At the heart of the story that God's telling is sacred love, a love that's unconditional, that never ends, that's always there for you. That's at the heart of the story that God's telling. Again, Christian worldview, this is not new stuff. What does all this have to do with suffering? This is a quote from Ravi. I meant to put this up, but I didn't, so I apologize. What does all this have to do with suffering? Everything. You see, when the skeptics ask why God did not fashion us so that we would only choose good, he or she completely drastically misses, what goodness is in God's eyes. Goodness is not an effect. Listen to this. Goodness is not an effect. If an effect is all that is important, of course God can make us that way. There is nothing logically contradictory about making us an automation or automaton. But if life is born out of sacredness, neither goodness nor love alone is the goal. It is reverence, and it must be chosen even when it is hard and costly. This kind of love is a choice to let the sanctity of life dictate the commitment of the will. This kind of reverential love can look upon suffering and see it beyond the clutches of time and through the victory of eternity. Okay, let me tell you the in other words, because I know that was really long and confusing, and I didn't even have it up there for you to read. So let me tell you the other words. In other words, what he's saying is, goodness in God's eyes is not for us to be robots who just do what he wants. Okay, if God wanted robots, he would have created robots and they would have done good all the time. But that's not goodness. That's something else, but it's not goodness.
That's controlling people.
hold on. Goodness is a choice to revere God and submit to him in love, even when evil is all around us. This reverence sees suffering in the context of the greater picture, or as the way Ravi says it, the victory of eternity. Okay? So, God gives us free will. By giving us free will, we can choose good or evil. You want to know why evil's in the world? Because he gives us free will. And we choose evil. Every day we choose evil. That's why evil's in the world. You want to know why pain and suffering in the world? Well, because way back when, Adam and Eve chose evil instead of good. But if God not taken that, and he taken that choice away from us and made us robots and made us choose good, had he made Adam and Eve choose good and just blocked off, put a big giant gate and maybe a fence around that tree so that they couldn't get to it, so that they would have to do good, well, that wouldn't be good. That would just be instinct. That would just be like animals. God wanted something more than animals. He wanted our love. Animals do what God made them do. The animals, they don't really do anything else. They just do what God made them to do, the instincts that he built into them. God wants more than that from us. Okay, number 4, we got 6 of these, and then I'm going to be done. So number 4, even though God is perfectly good, he understands evil. God understands evil as much as anyone because he himself is the victim of it. We're going to talk this Sunday about it. Jesus dying on the cross, Jesus, the perfect human, lived a sinless life, a perfect life. And because of living that perfect life, he was persecuted, he was tortured, he was beaten, he was spit on, ultimately crucified, which is one of the worst deaths a human could suffer. Definitely was one of the worst deaths back then that a human could suffer. Probably still today. He died that death. God knows what evil looks like because he experienced it firsthand. It's the woman who has been raped who understands what rape is, not the rapist. It's the victim of gossip who understands what gossip is, not the gossiper. It's the one who died for our sins who understands what evil is, not the sinner. Jesus is a victim of evil. He knows what evil is. Point number, you got a question about that, or you just raise your hand for the fun of it?
I know another way that he suffered evil. Like when Lucifer betrayed him.
Yeah, when Satan betrayed him at the beginning. Yeah, that's another one. That's one I don't think of too much, but you're right. You're betrayed by your chief angel. I would say, the person that's right under you. All right, number 5. Evil is in all of us. Many skeptics try to stand on the outside of evil and point their finger at it and blame God. They try to say, look at all this evil over here. See, that's why there is no God. Look at this. But what they fail to do is take that finger and point it back at them and realize there's evil inside of me too. I'm evil. I choose to do evil just as much as anybody else does. But Christians recognize that evil is part of all of us. Another question that skeptics may throw at Christians is, if you found out that there was absolute proof that God did not exist, what would you do in your life then that you can't do now because you believe God does exist? And the point that they're trying to get by asking that question is they're trying to say, come on, you know there's stuff you want to do. You know there's things that you just won't do because you're a Christian, but if you weren't a Christian, you would go do it. Come on. You go to a bar, get drunk, or go, sleep with whoever you want to sleep with, or, what would you do? Come on, tell me. And they'll try to push you and push you and push you. Maybe some of you guys have fantasized about that. I've probably fantasized about some of that stuff too. Maybe not the stuff I just talked about. Maybe so, I don't know. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to bring out the evil in you. They're trying to bring out the bad. They're trying to bring out the stuff, you don't believe in this, but you know you would do it if you didn't follow God. They're also trying to paint God to be this God who all he does is try to crack the whip and make sure that you stay in line and don't have any fun and don't do anything that you want to do. They're trying to paint God in the picture of just a rule giver. An impersonal rule giver who's ready to strike you with a bolt of lightning whenever you get out of line. Question here?
More of a statement.
Statement.
Christians do that every day anyways. I know.
Not all Christians do.
No,
I don't.
I said Christians do that every day. I never said all.
Okay.
I
agree with that.
I know a Christian was an alcoholic, but he still goes to church and he does everything. Bible book, but he just has a problem when he wants
And you are exactly right. And you will never hear me try to tell you that Christians are sinless or perfect or don't do all that stuff. You're right. You look at the divorce rate, Christians get divorced just as much as non-Christians. That alone tells me that Christians are just as sinful as non-Christians. So don't hear me try to tell you anything else. I'm certainly not trying to tell you that. In fact, that's exactly the point I'm making, that evil is in all of us, even Christians. Okay? But what I'm saying is what atheists will do, or what skeptics will do, is they'll ask you this question to try to kind of pin you in the corner and paint this picture of God. So, but in one question, they're blaming God for all the evil in the world. And then in the next question, they're blaming God for trying to prevent evil in your life. You see that? They say in one question, oh, God's to blame for all this evil. You know, if God exists, then why is all this evil in the world? But then they say, what would you do if God didn't exist? What would you want to do? Come on, tell me you want to do some stuff, right? You see how that contradicts? The questions themselves are contradictory questions. You get that? It's like they fail to recognize that there's evil in all of us. Christians, our Christian worldview says, yeah, there's evil in all of us. We recognize that. So final point. We've got 6 minutes, so I got to hurry up and make it. Evil does not mean that everything is meaningless and that there is no God. In fact, too much pain does not make things meaningless. Too much pleasure does. Let me say that again. Pain is not what causes people to feel like their lives are empty. Okay? When you go through pain, a lot of times that pain causes you to search for more meaning or eventually come up with figuring out what your meaning in life is. Pain does not typically lead people to feel like their life is meaningless. What leads people to feel like their life is meaningless more than pain, maybe pain might lead you to that, but too much seeking pleasure, the endless pursuit of pleasure. Typically, when all you do is pursue pleasure in your life, you get to a state where you feel like your life is meaningless. When all you care about is yourself, that's typically the time when people will find themselves at rock bottom saying, life is pointless. Okay? To help us see what I'm talking about, I want us to look back at John chapter 9. Again, I didn't get this on. I had an appointment this afternoon, and so I didn't get to finish my PowerPoint, so I apologize. But John chapter 9, I want us to hear Jesus' response again. I told you we'd go back to it. Here's what it says. It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the task assigned us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I am here in the world, I am the light of the world. Then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. He told him, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing. So he heals the blind man eventually. But the answer he gives is what I want us to hear. The purpose of that man being born blind was so that one day the scales of his spiritual blindness could be lifted and he could see the power of God at work in his life. Jesus says it this way. He said it wasn't his parents or him that sinned. It was so that the power of God could be seen in him. You see, Jesus understood that there is something greater going on. You know, Hindus and Buddhists, they're right. If they say that there's more to this world than what meets the eye, then they're right. Christians would agree with that. But the way they say to get to that world and the way that they focus on that world and say that this world doesn't mean anything, that's where they're wrong. Christians would say, yeah, there's more than what meets the eye. And most people in this world are walking around spiritually blind. They're like the blind man. They got scales on their eyes. They can't see anything, spiritually speaking. What Jesus said the purpose of that guy being blind was not bad, not evil, not anything remotely close to that. But instead, the purpose was so that that guy and everybody in that guy's life who was around watching Jesus do the miracle he was about to do could see the power of God and their eyes could be opened. Not their physical eyes, their spiritual eyes could be opened to the loving God who created the universe. You see, Jesus calls them back to that big story we're talking about. The story of God being holy. The story of the fact that we're part of God's story. That we're living in it. The context. You know, the man was blind, but there's a greater context to why the man was blind. And he was blind so that good could happen. So that people's eyes could be opened. Okay? Now, that story Man blind, suffering, okay. So how do you deal with all the other pain and suffering in our life? How do Christians deal with all the really bad pain? The stuff where there really is no good outcome or solution. How do we come to a conclusion that God is love when you see people suffering every day and they're not getting their eyes open spiritually? Well, again, Christianity calls us to a hope that no other faith calls us to. That hope is in the eternity, the eternal good. The fact that one day God is going to take everything that's happened in the world, from beginning to end, from Adam and Eve to Revelation. He's going to take everything that happened, including our lives, including all the pain and suffering we see in America, in Calcutta, in Antarctica,
New
I'm sure the
Mexico.
penguins are suffering. All the suffering we see in the world, when we get to the end, when we get to eternity, and we see God's goodness, we're going to look back on it and we're going to say, you know what? It was worth it. Now to me, I know, at least in my own little way, how much pain and suffering there is in this world. I've experienced some of it firsthand. I know you guys have experienced it firsthand. So if there's that much pain and that much suffering, and God is saying it's worth it, imagine how good the end is going to be. That every person that gets to the end, every person that gets there and sees God will turn back and look at everything that they went through and say, it was worth it. The blind man, I promise you, after being healed, would turn back and say, you know what? It was worth being blind for the first 30 years of my life. Because now my eyes are open, not just physically, but spiritually my eyes are open. And I would do it in a heartbeat over again if I could. Everybody, according to Christianity, according to our faith, is going to say that in the end. So you can draw your own conclusions. Okay? I've presented to you, now obviously I did a better job presenting the Christian worldview than I did the other ones because I don't practice those. But I have presented those pretty accurately, according to everything I've learned. Okay? I know the atheist worldview very well. Hindu, Buddhist, I can't say I know them great. But those don't really offer a whole lot of hope when dealing with the questions of evil. Is dealing with the question of evil hard? Absolutely. Because once again, you're dealing with people whose hearts are torn apart. And they don't want philosophical answers. They want pain medication to deal with their heart. So it's hard to deal with evil. But I'm telling you that the Christian worldview offers a better solution to evil than any of the other ones. The other ones try to run and flee from it and try to pretend like it doesn't really exist. Christians say, yeah, it exists, and this is why. So my challenge, again to you, Hammer, question before I wrap it up.
Yeah, so what you say is atheists, if they can quote, so therefore they have to believe it in some sort of way to be reading the Bible, regardless if you're just reading it, you get quotes out of it to put people in the line. You can still reading the Bible to get the quotes. So somewhere in between, somebody has taught them to read the Bible.
I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean they believe what's in the Bible just because they read it, but most of the time, if an atheist can quote the Bible really well, that's probably because at some point they had somebody who was a Christian teaching them at some point. So maybe they were a Christian themselves or they were raised in the church. I would say most of the time that's the case. Some atheists are just very studious, and so they read the Bible because it's a history book in their mind, just like they would read any other history book. But most atheists, I would say, if they can quote the Bible, it's because they have a Christian background or something like that. Okay. Once again, at the end of the day, even when dealing with the topic of evil, you compare Jesus to other gods, Jesus is going to stand tall. The other ones are going to crumble. Okay? So I hope you guys, this is head knowledge we're giving you today. I hope that when you're dealing with the pain and suffering in your life, this head knowledge will help bring you comfort to know that when I'm suffering, even in my suffering, I can praise God and recognize He's a good God. I may not know where He is right now. I may not be able to feel Him working in my life right now. but I trust that he's there, and I trust he is working, and I trust that in the end, we're going to look back on this and we're going to say, yeah, it's worth it. I'll go through it again.